thank you. I feel that anyone who's not moved by the words of Mr. Lewis on human rights and by the example that he has set with his life is not likely to be moved by my words, but at his request, I want to add a few specifics as they relate to this agreement and to the TPP. About 3 years ago, like most of the committee, I voted for permanent normal trade relations with Russia, in part because we included strong human rights protections in the form of the Magnitsky Act. One of the things that Mr. Lewis's bill will do is to preserve the right to deal with Magnitsky-type sanctions there where Russians brutalized and murdered Sergei Magnitsky, an attorney for foreign investors. He was trying to protect investment rights, and he lost his life in doing so. Thanks to Mr. Cardin and the involvement of a number of other people, we were able to pass the Magnitsky Act, but it was limited to Russia. I think it's very important to consider what countries TPP will open up the American market for. Well, it's probably not worse than Uzbekistan, to whom we accorded benefits through an earlier piece of legislation today, with its long habit of child labor and forced labor in a country run by a dictator who has been known to boil his opponents alive. The record of TPP partner Brunei is extremely troubling. The State Department's Human Rights Report found restrictions on religious freedom, trafficking in persons, discrimination against women and the LGBT community, and that was before the Sultan recently introduced Sharia law. Brunei now has harsh penalties for distributing material against Sharia. In one state government after another, there have been those who sought to prevent Sharia law where it didn't exist and wouldn't exist, but we are opening our markets and making a partner of a country that relies on Sharia law. And while certainly its performance is not as bad as Guatemala, where 70 unionists were murdered in the 8 years that USTR didn't do anything about the labor complaint under CAFTA, our TPP partner, Mexico, my neighbor there in Texas, has been involved or has witnessed the arbitrary killing of civilians by its security forces. There is in the Human Rights Report from the State Department the conclusion that there is widespread impunity for human rights abuses. Its Human Rights Commission received 32 complaints in the first 9 months of 2013 and acted upon one of them. In TPP partner Vietnam, to which Mr. Lewis referred, there are so many sad stories about one activist after another. The woman who was attacked by 5 assailants while on a motorcycle with her 2 young children and beat up. People that continue to face very violent responses from groups associated with the security forces for simply expressing their opinion. The report notes severe restrictions on freedom of expression, association, and peaceful assembly. More recently, another of those trading partners, Malaysia, this very month, a cartoonist was charged with 9 counts of sedition for criticizing a court decision. The court decision concerned the fact that the leader of Malaysia decided to bring charges against a former ally of sodomy, and the cartoonist referred to the judges as lackeys in black robes. He now faces a 5-year prison term. I believe that trade, though it hasn't worked that well in China, and I voted for PNTR for China on the theme that trade would open up and elevate human rights, that we need to give consideration to the fact that trade is more than just widgets moving across our border. Our trade agreements need to reflect our values. We certainly must not give an agreement for fast track if it fails to meaningfully address human rights and labor rights as Mr. Lewis has outlined them in his amendment. I would urge the adoption of the Lewis Amendment as a reflection of our values so that our trade is about boosting our economy and more jobs, but it's also about more respect for basic human values that we want for ourselves and our own families and ought to be promoting around the world, and I yield back.